Happy Friday night. It's time to kick the tires and light the fires here on the Wrestling Perspective. No P.D. Williams. He's out La-Bamboing it in Mexico while I sit here doing a little Impact tapings in Mexico. I'm here, Dennis Farrell, alongside guest host, a friend of mine, a guy who, before I got into the wrestling business, before I made the leap from the four-net letter sports network into the wrestling podcast world, I read a lot of his stuff, then I watched a lot of his videos. It's the only man in wrestling with three names that matter, Sean Ross Sapp. What's going on?
And in a place just as exotic as Mexico, beautiful Ewing, Kentucky.
You know what? That is a hop, skip, and a jump from where I am in Michigan.
Yeah, not too far. I mean, one state separates us.
It's sadly, because now I'm going to come down and hang out with you.
There's not much to hang out with down here, man.
So let's talk a little bit before we get into the news and notes. We got a lot to hit today. We're going to talk some Kenny Omega. Where is he going to land? Tony Khan. How much money does he really have? Look, this All Elite Wrestling has dominated the news. We're going to hit on a lot of that stuff. And we're going to talk WWE and what they need to do to counterpunch what's going on in the wrestling world. But Sean, let's talk about how you got started first in the wrestling industry.
Well, I mean, I had a knack for writing, and I wanted to be, well, I don't want to say I wanted to be a wrestler or a fighter, but I tried my hand at that. I trained for a while and decided that I wanted to go into the media side of things, but kept training. That way I could have an angle on it that maybe some people didn't have. And in 2010, I reached out to Bill after a lot of me kicking the tires and waiting around. And then finally I was like, you know what? I want to write for this guy. I want to get my foot in the door. Maybe he'll give me a shot. He did, and he ended up being the guy several years later that recommended me for the dream job that I have now with Fightful.com.
In about 30 seconds or less, talk a little bit about Fightful. We'll hit a break, come back, we'll do some news and talk more about Fightful.
Sure. We are a combat sports crossover website. We cover MMA, pro wrestling, boxing. We've had guys that worked for us like Shane Helms, Matt Riddle, Elias Theodoru, Frank Trigg, UFC Hall of Famer. We really focus on the crossover aspect of all this, and we cover all your daily news too. We've got tons of exclusives. We break a lot of news like Ronda Rousey training to be a wrestler, Becky Lynch being out of her Survivor Series match. So we're not just aggregating, so to speak. We're breaking a lot of news across all three sports.
When we come back from this break, Sean Ross Sapp from Fightful and myself, Dennis Farrell, will hit you with all the news and rumors in wrestling to get you going into your Friday night, Saturday morning, and Sunday night. You're listening to Wrestling Perspective. We'll be right back. Wrestling Perspective back. Happy Friday night, everybody. Myself from Fightful.com, one of the best wrestling websites out there. This is where I get the majority of my news when PD and myself do the Wrestling Perspective podcast. We get it from Fightful.com. One of my favorite industry members right now is Sean Ross Sapp. I'm honored to have him co-host tonight with me. Sean, thanks, man, for sticking this out with me.
No, I was happy to do it when you asked. Meant to link up with you on something like this in the past, and glad it's happening.
Let's get into some news, rumors, and whatever we can just get in the next 10 minutes. This Kenny Omega thing is, I think to me, it's quite easy what's going on, but if you're just listening, and if you're outside the WWE bubble and you're trying to learn more about what's going on, and what 2018 has been the best year in wrestling ever, in my opinion, Kenny Omega has been one of the figureheads of what's going on with New Japan and Ring of Honor. He was part of the Bullet Club and this All Elite stuff going on, and he's kind of one of the slower members to get caught up and figure out what's going on. And this is what, to me, All Elite needs, is don't show your hand right away. We all know Kenny Omega is going to end up there. I cannot see him going to the WWE machine. But I think Kenny Omega, you need some surprise names. You can't show your hand right away, Sean. And look, I don't read a ton of dirt sheets. I like the news stuff. I don't read a ton of dirt sheets. So this is me talking as a fan, not as a industry insider. But what's your gut tell you?
My gut tells me that Kenny can't really say what he's going to do right now because he's under contract to New Japan. And in the landscape we're in right now, even while All Elite and New Japan might be on friendly terms, you don't want to be accused of contract tampering. Obviously, a lot of these guys knew where they were going to go and had talked to one another about where they were going to go well ahead of time. But Kenny's under contract through the end of the month, I'm told. And I don't think that you want to risk that, especially so early in your company. So I think the announcement will be made, much like Jim Ross. He's under WWE contract for several months. You can't mention anything about him until that deal's out.
Is this, for you, clear cut? Because it seems like the internet loves to run with these rumors of, is Kenny going to WWE? Will he have creative control? Dun, dun, dun. And I feel like it's a dud. It's just a lot of news sites trying to drum up hits and clicks.
Well, yeah, he won't have creative control because nobody has creative control. Nobody has had creative control in decades, and that was Hulk Hogan in WCW, and that was it. Almost nobody has ever had creative control. They've had creative input, but yeah, I would be surprised if Kenny Omega ended up going to WWE. Although I also wouldn't be surprised if WWE stepped in and made another really, really big offer for Kenny Omega, especially considering how everything went down on Tuesday.
Now, in segment 3, if you guys hang out for that, Sean Ross Sapp and myself from Fightful.com, we're going to go through All Elite Wrestling and talk a little bit about the roster makeup. And then the next segment, we'll talk a little WWE. But until then, Tony Khan was on Xbox 12360 podcast, which is great if you guys have not listened to it. And to see what he's saying and how he wants this to progress, it's really intriguing because I'm really digging to me, it almost has a WCW feel. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I was a WCW guy. I loved the NWA. So when and I'm just old enough, I'm in my 40s, that I remember all this stuff vividly and watching it roll out in the excitement and how, for me, being a kid, I loved wrestling. I didn't even know what a dirt sheet or tape trading was at the time. So I was super excited about this. This kind of has that feel of, look, no one will ever compete with the WWE, but All Elite could be a clear-cut number 2 if things are done right.
Yeah, and right now I think that Ring of Honor holds that number 2 card, at least in America. I consider Ring of Honor and New Japan virtually the same company because of how they operate together, at least within that space. But All Elite Wrestling can threaten. And the thing is, Ring of Honor had the benefit over so many others because they have Sinclair Broadcast Group behind them, which is a giant company. The All Elite company has the Khan family behind them, which isn't a huge company, but is a huge family with tons of money, and they're entrepreneurs and they're into sports, and Tony has been a wrestling fan for so long. So I think they have a lot of advantages over some others. There aren't exactly a ton of people in Sinclair Broadcast Group that scream out to me that they know what they're doing with pro wrestling, but they do have an entity that makes money. The Khan family are trying a way different business approach, pouring a lot more money into it, and are going to try to employ that same method.
Now, and it looks like it's going to be money well spent because they're putting the right people in charge that know the wrestling business, unlike WCW did back in the day where they had businessmen trying to run a wrestling company.
Yeah, it seems so. They've already hired Billy Gunn. I know BJ Whitmer's working with them. Even Brandy Rhodes is chief brand officer. When she got up on that podium and spoke at the press conference, I was like, wow, she's a natural. I mean, obviously all that WWE hosting paid off for her because she was a natural on that microphone. It remains to be seen how having the Young Bucks and Cody Rhodes as talent / vice presidents will work out. I hope it works out well for them because what's good for any particular wrestling company is usually good for the whole, especially when it comes to a company trying to become number 2 or threaten number 1, whatever it may be. I think that they did a lot of the right things early and said a lot of the right things early.
When we come back from this break, we'll talk some more All Elite Wrestling because it's just dominated the press. There's so much stuff we can get into and talk about. We haven't even scratched the surface on what Chris Jericho could do for this company. 10 seconds or so, what's the next article you have coming out?
I do the Fightful Wrestling Weekly every Friday. It's got about 1,000 words worth of exclusives that maybe didn't fit into an article or maybe that you all missed this week.
Hey, Wrestling Perspective, you're listening to it right now. Happy Friday night. When we come back, we're talking All Elite Wrestling and some Chris Jericho right here on Wrestling Perspective. You can get the podcast at WrestlingPerspectivePodcast.com. Hang on. In 2 and 2, we will be right back to talk more wrestling, you nerds. That's right, we're talking wrestling, All Elite Wrestling, myself and special guest host Sean Ross Sapp from Fightful.com. You truly are. I keep saying this in and out of the breaks, but you truly are one of my favorites. Here's where I turn 16-year-old girl on you. Anytime you like or retweet one of my tweets, I giggle like a little girl. That's how happy I am when, like, oh, Sean Ross Sapp noticed me. Oh, my gosh.
Oh, my gosh. Well, I don't like a whole lot of tweets. I use them to bookmark, but I retweet your stuff all the time.
I know. I get all giggly. And speaking of Twitter, if you're on Twitter or any other social medias, where is Sean Ross Sapp on?
I am cross-platform at Sean Ross Sapp. If you are a wrestling fan, you do not want to follow me on Facebook or Instagram. I have nothing wrestling related. But Twitter, at Sean Ross Sapp. We have a Fightful Instagram at Fightful Online. And on Facebook at Fightful Online. I also have like a personal business page on Facebook. But I rarely update that. I am 100% Fightful.
And you can find him on Grindr. No, I'm just joking. Anyways, I actually meant to say another one. I've been married for so long, I don't even know what dating apps are anymore.
I'm pretty sure that's the gay dating app.
Is that the gay one? Oh,
I'm pretty sure.
That is horrible. Oh, I'm so sorry. Anyways, let's move on. All Elite Wrestling. We'll probably delete that. All Elite Wrestling. Tony Khan, we talked about him coming into this break a little bit, and I read somewhere that this guy has more money than Vince McMahon to play with.
I don't know if he has more money than Vince McMahon to play with. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, because Shad Khan is his father, and that the family might have more. The family does have more money than Vince McMahon. I don't know if Tony Khan personally does. I'm not sure of his finances, but I mean, the rumored numbers that are being thrown around about the investment are pretty high.
It absolutely is. You know, they always say you never go into a business opportunity and play with house money. So, you know, what they're going to be doing is, you know, using investment money, investment opportunities going into this. But boy, that bank account that they have to bankroll this, because I don't even know if the numbers have even been revealed. But to land Chris Jericho to a contract, has there been any contract leakage of what is in it coming out yet?
Not necessarily yet. We know that Cody and the Bucks have 5-year deals, and Joey Janela is still able to do his spring break shows, and there's some lenience there. But as far as dollar amounts, there's not a lot out there.
Because let's play the speculation game. You know, you get Chris Jericho, you're going to want to lock him up. I'm sure he's going to be able to do his Chris Jericho cruise, and there's probably going to be some cross-branding there. I have a feeling Chris Jericho will still be able to go to Japan if he wants to, if he's not tied up. This, once again, all speculation here. But, you know, if you're All Elite, you want to lock Chris Jericho up to an exclusive contract, which is kind of slowly becoming outdated in the independent world now.
Yeah, and the thing with Jericho is you got to wonder if he's going to give you that exclusivity. Even if he signs a deal, I mean, it's good to ink him to a few dates at the very least. And he's done that. We've seen him sign the contract. But exclusivity, who knows? WWE already pulled him from their intro, so that's kind of telling. I get the feeling, just me speculating, he probably told Vince what was going to happen. But, yeah, with Chris Jericho, there's always question marks.
And they moved him over to the alumni page on the WWE website, which I don't think that's too telling. If he was, you know, kicked off the website altogether, scrubbed from WWE history, which we've seen that in the past, then maybe I would worry a little bit, but I don't think you worry too much. This had to have happened. I mean, I equate this to like a baseball player in his twilight years that feels like he has 1 or 2 years left to go. The team he's been with for his whole career says, we think you're done, we're moving on. You know, do you blame the guy for trying to play somewhere else? Is that tarnishing his reputation? Or do you say, you know what, you still got game, some other team wants you, go for it?
I don't think it tarnishes his reputation because of what we've seen in New Japan over the last year or so. He's put on high-level matches with high-level opponents and done some really creative, different stuff. That he was doing really good, creative, different stuff in WWE as well with the list. I mean, that was who saw that coming? But what he's done over the last year in the ring has eclipsed what he's done over several of his runs in WWE. Like you saw some of his best matches ever this late in his career.
It's interesting and fun too to see this Chris Jericho because being a wrestling fan is like being a rock music fan, where you always say, oh, I remember this band when, two of the members were in this other side band doing something else. And you feel like you're special or cool because you knew of them before they exploded and they were the big band. And now I knew Chris Jericho when he was in ECW. I knew Chris Jericho when he did this. I kind of throw it back, but this Chris Jericho right now that we're watching, in the ring, like you said, phenomenal. But being able to have that freedom personality-wise, I think deep down inside, this is what he craves, is to have this kind of creative freedom.
Yeah, he's a creative guy. He's really smart. He understands wrestling. That goes a long way, and especially in a company where they're probably going to bend his ear quite a bit. I think it's a good fit.
Now, Twitter has been a buzz with All Elite, the future, what's going to happen. Are they going to fizzle out? Are they going to hang on in there? Now, the first year, I don't think you put any sort of, not restraints on them, but you can't put any pressure on them. They're building storylines, TV. I think that you will really get to feel 2 to 3 years into this venture on whether it's working or not. You can't use the first year because they're developing the characters. They're signing talent, working out the kinks on what they want to go. I think if you try to figure out what the future of All Elite is, you have to throw year one all the way out.
Yeah, well, I don't even know when year one technically starts. Does it start with Double or Nothing? Does it start with the rally? Does it start with the announcement? Does it start with the TV deal, assuming they get one? There's too many question marks surrounding it for me right now.
Does All Elite right now, is it bigger than Impact? Right this second, not even running a show.
Man, I got to say yes right now because unfortunately, and sorry to Petey, but
it's all right.
Impact has built a lot of bad will. How many consecutive pay-per-views does it feel like there's been some overbooked main event in Impact Wrestling? And you've got guys like Alberto Del Rio and Austin Aries who have been traditionally problematic in the past, given really high points on this card. I mean, no disrespect to Johnny Impact. He's an amazing wrestler and talent, but you can see him a lot of different places. Impact isn't the only place you can see that guy. And how many reboots can you go through and name changes before somebody says, okay, I'm just done with that? And apparently a lot of people did with the move to Pop. I do think the move to Twitch is a smart one for them in that regard, although I'm not buying the Ed Nordholm spin that he's putting on everything and saying, oh, this was the plan all along. I'm like, yeah, I bet it was. Will they get more viewers on Twitch? Probably. That being said, the All Elite rally immediately, within a few hours, drew more eyeballs to it than any Impact TV show over the last year.
That probably more people could find it too, more than any Impact TV show.
That's a good point.
And look, I've knocked PD and I make fun of going to the Pursuit Network, but to me, it's not even a positive step forward. It's not even a step sideways. To me, it's 2 steps back. You've worked really hard over the last year to rebuild your product, to build bridges that the regime before and 2 years before have not only burnt down, but just napalmed the landscape. You've worked really hard to grow the green grass, to build the bridges, and now the only thing you have to show for it is some goodwill and pursuit.
Yeah, I don't think hunting shows went on the Pursuit Network.
And we were talking about this. Now, if Pursuit was smart, maybe they go out and try to buy the rights to the Shawn Michaels hunting show. They maybe try to go out and, because, Eric Young used to have a fishing show back in the day. So
he's great, yeah.
You buy the rights to that, and maybe you can bookend, Impact with a Shawn Michaels hunting show, a fishing show with, Eric Young, and Chipper Jones, baseball, Atlanta Braves great future Hall of Famer, had a hunting show too. That might be how you would build a Pursuit channel in my mind around this, but I don't know if you could even land the rights to those shows.
Yeah, it would be tough, but when I look at that, I'm like, man, Pursuit. And when I heard that Nordholm was trying to sell people a bill of goods, saying that was the idea all along, it wasn't. It wasn't the plan. They want on as big of a network as they can possibly get, And if Pursuit walked up to me tomorrow and said, hey, we're going to air your podcast, it'll be a barter system, no extra cost to you, I'd still have to say, ooh, I'll have to think about how that would look.
Maybe they do like a Talking Impact show afterwards or something like that. It's pre-recorded. You might be able to pull it off, but you're going to have to get away from that Hunting Network show, and maybe you upset 13 out of the 20 fans that watch the network now. And I joke, I can kid about this because I love PD like a brother, but this Pursuit Network, it's like, I can't even think of a example of cats and dogs. One of these things don't belong, and you can put your finger on it here.
Yeah, I agree. Impact could do a lot. With WWE getting the amount of money that they got, I'm surprised that Impact had no suitors that they picked over this. But then again, if you do have other suitors, you can't run on Twitch. There's not going to be a lot of broadcasters that say, oh yeah, we'll let you run on a free online digital service that undercuts our ads. So, man, I don't know. I hope they can find a way to make a negative, turn a negative into a positive.
It's going to be tough. And I got to ask you this because I don't think I've really heard anywhere else. How real was the opportunity of them landing on a different network? We heard there might be this and it could be that, but was there any real chance or real talks with any networks outside of Pursuit?
I mean, there were talks from what I understand, but obviously nothing that was any sort of substantial money, or they would have went with that. I mean, their money troubles have been well documented, although not nearly as much since Anthem took over. Like, people aren't getting paid late. But I mean, Anthem laid off John Pollock and Wei Ting, and obviously that was a bad idea. They're doing great on their own now. They laid off Robin Black. They laid off all these veteran people, seemingly to keep Impact afloat, or at least to further that. I don't know, man. It's a wild situation.
There's so much Impact can do to rebound. I just don't think they're going to do it in 2019 with All Elite and the buzz. And basically, I don't know if WWE, when we, look, we're still a couple minutes away from this next break, and we're going to talk the WWE side of this whole All Elite thing that not a lot of people are talking about, because you are starting to see and hear rumors of the cracks in the WWE of what could be going on. We will definitely address that. Sean, let's talk a little bit more, though, about Fightful.com. Do you remember the first time? Listen, we've kind of documented your journey throughout the last couple segments there, but talk a little bit about Fightful and how that was the right fit for you.
Well, I had started the podcast at a former employer that I was at, and I was looking to improve my situation financially, couldn't come to terms, but I knew what I was worth, and I knew what I was going to aspire to do, and that was to get out of the aggregation game, and or at least primarily, and start chasing exclusives and talking to people within the business and doing all that. And I had an article about Muhammad Hassan. It was his first interview in, I think, a decade, and it did incredibly well. I did another long form about the Brawl for All, and that kind of became my thing. And I was like, okay, I can become a news source. I can reach out to these people. And I still couldn't come to terms. And a guy named James Vanderlinden, reached out to me. He used to run a website called jimmyvan.com back in the 90s and early 2000s. And he laid it out to me. He was like, hey, I want to run a pro wrestling, MMA, and boxing website. I see that you've trained in all three. I see that you've trained some people in one of them. I see that you do some commentary. And you also do a lot of media. Do you want to do this? And he hit me with the terms, and I loved it. It's perfect for me because my world revolves around MMA and pro wrestling.
In 30 seconds or less, let's talk a little bit about your podcast, what's it's called, and where can people find it?
Yeah, you all can find it on podcast platforms everywhere. YouTube, iHeart, Spotify, iTunes, all over the place. Fightful Podcast. We have MMA, boxing, and wrestling shows, post-Raw, post-SmackDown, post-pay-per-view shows. We also have our flagship show, The Listing Ya Boy, with myself and the aforementioned Jimmy Van. We also have FightfulSelect.com, which is our premium service where you all can support us directly.
When we come back here on Wrestling Perspective, we'll talk about the WWE side of things with All Elite Wrestling. You're listening to Wrestling Perspective. Happy Friday night, everybody. WrestlingPerspectivePodcast.com. If you missed any of it, you can find this podcast up there soon. Myself, Sean Ross Sapp, will be right back. Wrestling Perspective, we are back. Happy Friday night. Myself and Fightful.com's own Sean Ross Sapp is joining me. Listen, if you missed any of what we talked about, it's been All Elite Wrestling heavy. You can go back and listen to it at WrestlingPerspectivePodcast.com. And don't forget, head over to BlueChew.com. Use the promo code WPP. Get your first order for free and only have to pay $5 shipping and handling. Now, Sean, We've been heavy on All Elite Wrestling. Let's flip the coin here and talk WWE. The big boy on the block, the bully. There were reports coming out that at SmackDown and Raw that they were turning away fans wearing All Elite Wrestling merchandise. Now, I don't know how true that is. It sounds like it's one of those things where you have a few rowdy fans. Maybe they ask them to move off a camera side, or you know how wrestling fans are. But what have you heard about this?
It is very real. I heard from the initial person who reported it. I followed up with no less than 6 people who were kicked out, and eventually they were let in. But initially, people with All Elite Wrestling shirts, if they saw them, they would be told that they weren't able to buy tickets, and eventually WWE gave in. There's a security guard who confirmed it as much. There were some people who tried to say that it was a Pro Wrestling Tees ruse and that Pro Wrestling Tees has a stake in All Elite Wrestling and that they're vested in the success and yada yada. And of course I suspected that, which is why I reached out to other people. It was confirmed, man. WPPR later told me they are being let in the building, but didn't say anything about them being rejected from the building to begin with. But it was a very real thing. I had some weird people, man, accusing security guards of being crisis actors when they admitted that they weren't allowed to let these AEW fans in.
That's so we're going there now. That's quite interesting, because this is something that can't be sustained forever for WWE. It's almost like shooting yourself in the kneecap because you have an itch on your foot and you just don't want to bend all the way down. If you're stealing money from yourself, if you see Bullet Club shirts everywhere, you saw NWO shirts everywhere, why do they draw the line here?
Probably because of the nature of the presser. Like Cody said, they blew up half of the block, like 100 yards away from the venue. So I'm sure they're not thrilled about that. I'm sure they're not thrilled about some of the things that have been said and the landscape being changed, and they don't want to encourage that. But I think in rejecting people, they did create a groundswell, and it backfired.
So WWE, they don't really need to do anything. They're their own money-making machine. They're printing money. Their motto for the longest time is don't acknowledge anybody else. Now, with the way the independent wrestling scene has blown up and is becoming its own, ecosystem without the WWE, I think this is going to force the WWE going forward to make changes on how they do business with other companies and within themselves.
Yeah, I think that we're going to see them, as we've seen in recent weeks, it's going to become more of a babyface territory, kind of like the 80s when they were making so much money that they were building towards, they wanted to build their territory towards a live event selling type of product. Now, they've got all this money guaranteed, but they need to fill up the houses. They need to fill up live events and get that extra money. So I wouldn't be surprised, not necessarily to see all the baby faces go over, but to see a more crowd-pleasing product and less of trolling the audience, which has been seemingly on the itinerary for years. It's a really, really odd business model. But I get the feeling that's going to change with Fox and USA, because WWE does not, regardless of what the viewership numbers mean or don't mean, or how they've changed over the last several years or decades, they don't want to see those numbers dwindle. They don't want to see those numbers go down. And I think that the product's going to reflect that.
Recent weeks, we saw WWE basically come out and say, we're going to change the way we're going to do things. You guys have stopped watching. We're going to do whatever we can to get you back. Start the year, it was kind of a ho-hum Raw. You go into this Raw, not much better. You start out with a 6-man tag team match, which nobody ever wants to see that start out a show. these Raw shows aren't being different, aren't changing. I think the only thing I see changing in Raw and SmackDown now is management's being slapped more for no reason, by the way. You take away a championship opportunity from Seth Rollins, he gets mad, goes out, dominates a 6-man tag team match, come back and slaps Triple H, and Triple H is like, I love this fire. I'll give you a chance at the belt now. It just seems like it's more of the same. And WWE is so polished and so handcuffed itself into what they do, they can't change. They can't stop on a dime and turn left. This is like the Titanic, and I don't mean it like they're going under, but it's this big, massive Titanic boat going towards a losing fans with ratings iceberg, and it takes 100 people to turn the ship and a week for it to get turned. This is a WWE that just can't change.
I think eventually they'll have to. I think they're going to recognize it, and they're going to make efforts. They've already made a little bit of an effort. I see stakes being increased on the show, more title matches on Raw, more top contender matches. The top contender matches thing is immediately a product of them getting rid of the really old, antiquated immediate rematch, which I absolutely loathe. I thought it was pointless. It hamstrung you into making somebody lose twice. Now there are some other tropes they need to get rid of. Some of these weird production things where I tweeted a video last night of where you could see the cameraman physically shaking the camera as he's filming Naomi and Mandy Rose brawling backstage. People don't like that. I haven't seen anybody step up to me in the dozens of times I've tweeted about it and say, you know what? I like having a seizure while I watch wrestling. Yeah. That's what I like. I love the zooms. Never once. So hopefully they can get rid of those tropes that they picked up through their films division, which isn't working, and really just listen to what people want instead of assuming they always know what's best. Sometimes they do, but not always.
But realistically, as two fans talking, two guys that love the industry, let's stop pretending that, and I don't really consider myself a wrestling industry guy or insider. I'm just a guy with a mic that made a leap from fantasy football and a 4-letter network to something I love in wrestling. So I feel like I'm a fan first, and nowhere close to an industry insider. You're in there, you know the business way more than I ever will. I've just been lucky enough to ride PD's coattails at shows. So let's say realistically, as fans, what can WWE do for you to make you feel like they are changing things around? You stated a second ago, getting rid of some of the antiquated rule changes. Is there anything production-wise other than shaking the camera you feel like they could do?
Let the commentators be commentators a little bit more, clue them in a little bit less, make things a little bit more spontaneous, allow the third person in the booth, if you're going to have them, to actually say something rather than state the obvious. Treat your audience with respect, but leave some subtle hints in there. Leave some little things that lead to something else down the line. If you want a smarter crowd that pays smarter money, then treat them smarter, and they'll get smarter.
I am a firm believer that I love how some wrestlers have A and B storylines, and I'm a big fan of that. But I feel like the A storyline needs to last longer than 3 weeks. You can't tell the story in 3 weeks, and I love story-based wrestling. The old school wrestling, I'm one of those guys. I get it. The younger guys are probably hate how us old people back in my day, angles lasted a year. You know, it doesn't have to last a year, but make it last a little bit longer. Tell some stories. I get that it's harder, that you've got to spend 3 to 5 to 7 hours a month and day a week for content. I get that. But have longer A storylines. Have shorter B storylines. But to me, you got to stretch things out a little bit. Slow down. Take a breath. I don't need you to hammer me with WWE content day and night. Let it linger. The one thing I hate about TV binging is between commercials and between weeks on TV, I don't have time to digest what happens and go, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next week? You just jump into the next show.
Yeah, and there's just not any real long-term storytelling. The most long-term storyline we've got is AJ Styles getting punched in the balls. That's it. That's the longest-term storyline we have, is that AJ Styles probably isn't going to have kids anymore.
Thank God, by the way. I think he has 2 already. He's in his 40s.
He's got 3. He's got them all tattooed on his ribs. His tattoo artist is going to be mad.
Someone just got put out of work because of this. Way to go, Nakamura. But you're kind of right about that. That outside of that, what long storylines do they have? What the great thing about the Attitude Era was things still kind of lasted a while. Golden age in the 90s of wrestling, things lasted a while. Then you get into the, ruthless aggression era, and it's just snap, 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 go, 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 go. And we've had a million amazing storylines through the last 10 years of wrestling, but can you really think of any that could, hang in the hallways of, WWE Hall of Fame storytelling? Because you can't, because it happens so fast and it doesn't have time to develop.
I really enjoyed the Braun Strowman-Roman Reigns storyline. I thought that was really fun stuff. It got Braun Strowman over because there was this polarizing character in Roman Reigns. And the story was they tore up a lot of stuff because they didn't like each other. And I thought that was fun for today. I often said on my podcast, like, Kurt Angle's legit because he's an Olympic gold medalist. Brock Lesnar's legit because he was a great amateur and a UFC fighter. Braun is legit because I believe that he could tear up all this stuff somehow. It's just turned up a little bit more. Outside of that, man, I can't remember a lot of storylines that have really hooked me and just had me in recently.
Speaking of Roman, outside of him popping up at a couple college football games, you haven't really heard anything about how he's progression with his leukemia treatments. Do you know anything about that? I know I'm just kind of throwing this curveball at you here.
Oh, no, it's fine. He's in good spirits, working to get better. Seth Rollins seems to think he'll be back sooner than later, but you never really know in that situation how unpredictable that can be. Obviously, he was in remission or gone for 10 years, to the point to where Shane Helms, who I did a show with, he teamed with Roman Reigns' brother for years, had no idea this was even a thing. So he's not the type of guy that wants attention for that, but they wanted to be transparent in the situation, and he wanted to help other people. So I think that's what he's focused on right now.
When he comes back, massive babyface. There's no way Roman Reigns gets booed when he comes back.
He's going to get the biggest pop of his entire life the next time his music hits.
Now, look, as a fan, is this the point where you turn him heel? Because boy, WWE finally gets what they want. The crowd cheers him. They love him. We're never turning him heel. Boy, this is the moment. This is the moment where you slap the fans in the face, and it would be phenomenal.
Well, I don't think that the Vince McMahon decree of listening to the fans would be happening if Roman Reigns hadn't been gone. I think he'd be pushing forward with Roman Reigns as his top babyface champion and trying to make everybody else a heel or a number 2 at the expense of a Roman Reigns push. I just think that's the way it would be.
And with him gone off of TV, oddly enough, it really makes you appreciate what he brought to the show. Minus the leukemia, let's just say he was in a accident and he's off TV for 4 or 5 months. It really makes you appreciate, with him not being there, how much they needed him.
Yeah, from an in-ring perspective, he was really good. Creatively, there was a lot left to be desired, and they relied on a lot of people just showing up and just saying, Roman, these people don't really like you. I'm a babyface. Let's have a match. And they would try to work that polarizing crowd instead of just going full-fledged and doing the hottest thing you could possibly do. They did him a real disservice because as big as he is, he could have been way bigger if they did creatively satisfying things for him.
Look, when we come back here, we're heading into the final few minutes of the Wrestling Perspective. Sean and I will sit down and continue talking a little bit about wrestling and where you can find us guys on the internet. I know it's radio and you have a lot of time. 80 markets, by the way, this is what we're being heard in. Thank you guys so much for really embracing this. But when we come back, we'll talk some more with Sean Ross Sapp. Wrestling Perspective, we're back. Sean Ross Sapp from Fightful.com is sitting here with me. Sean, thank you so much for taking time out of your Friday night to hang out with me and talk some wrestling. I feel like you and I are 2 wrestling nerds that truly just enjoy wrestling for what it is.
Hey, wrestling's my life, man. Whether it's doing it, learning about it, that's my favorite part of my job is I get to learn about it. And I get to learn about it oftentimes from the people who read our stuff, watch our stuff, listen to our stuff. That's the best thing, man. You can learn from anybody.
I had an amazing 6 month period where me and one of my other former co-hosts, which we don't really talk about right now, we had a chance to interview Chris Jericho, which was phenomenal.
Sure.
Then we got a chance, me and Petey Williams, to interview the Young Bucks just a few weeks before the end of the year, which was even better. And to me, that's the highlight of my radio career. You've worked with some of the bigger names. What was one of those interviews where you turned into a 14-year-old boy and you're like, I can't believe I'm talking to X, Y, and Z?
I don't know that that's ever happened. I've been able to separate. I mean, I do look at it as a job. I am a fan of wrestling. I love it, but I do treat it as a job. It's really important to me in that regard. I think when I was like, wow, I'm doing this, I think it was when I was interviewing Jim Ross one time. The first time I interviewed Jim Ross, and I was never specifically a huge Jim Ross fan or anything, but he was the soundtrack of my childhood. He was the voice that narrated my childhood, whether it be WCW in the early days when I was a Sting fan. He was the first voice I think I ever heard on pro wrestling TV, and that continued through the 90s and the 2000s. So that was definitely a moment when I was like, okay, cool. And anytime that I got offered a job where I was like, okay, this is going to change me, I can do this and nothing else, that's what puts it in perspective for me, because I love the coverage aspect of it.
See, I look at it different because I kind of did the same thing with baseball and football. I have actors and radio guys and people that call me and ask me for advice still to this day that blows my mind. Like, don't want to name drop because I would love to interview Jim Ross, but like the guys from Super Troopers and Beer Fest, they'll call me and be like, hey, who would you start today? And I'm like, what are you guys talking to me for? And it took me into getting into wrestling to really appreciate that these guys are talking to me, at least in the wrestling world. And football, like, I'll talk to a ton of current baseball players. Doesn't mean anything because I feel like a 40-year-old guy trying to relate to a 19, 20-year-old guy, and it just doesn't come off great on the radio. But now I'm talking to these wrestler guys who seem more mature in the business than any other sport.
Oh, yeah. I would say the weirdest connections that I've made via wrestling are like people will see that Wale, the rapper, and P. Diddy follow me on Twitter. They follow me on Twitter because of pro wrestling, because they follow that. And subsequently, people go through who they follow, track down email addresses, and will send mixtapes to those email addresses, assuming that there's somebody in the music business. So I've had to probably about a half a dozen times email people back and be like, I appreciate you sending me beats, but they follow me because of wrestling, not because of music.
Sean Ross Sapp from Fightful.com, thank you so much for sitting out here with me on Friday night to talk some wrestling, and hopefully we'll get together and talk soon.
Yeah, I would love it, man. I thank you for having me on. It means a lot.
All right. Guys, Wrestling Perspective, go to WrestlingPerspectivePodcast.com for all of your wrestling needs. Go to Fightful.com and listen to The List and Your Boy with Sean Ross Sapp. Thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. It's okay to nerd out. I'm about to. Have a good night, everybody.